big tech or big wireless makes big tobacco look like a mom and pop shop. The wireless industry learned from the lessons of the past, or you could say the PR firms, because they employed the same PR firms as big tobacco, telephone companies have, and really mastered the art of influencing people and making it seem like cell phones and Wi-Fi and wireless, and of course now 5G are safe.
We're FDR Middle School. We are an urban district, so a lot of our students don't have the resources that other students do. This is an opportunity for them to see that technology can open up their experiences. They can see things that they normally wouldn't see.
This is amazing.
A lot of technology is promoted in schools by industry, but really the schools are their test bed and almost like their playground to test new technology. Children and parents are not being informed that the radiation from all of these devices is actually being absorbed into their brain. And there is no data documenting that this is safe. And of course, all of these studies showing harmful effects, even at low and legal levels. Industry is also promoting cell phones as a rite of passage, fully aware that there are risks involved.
But what you really need to think about is, why do I want this for my child? What are the potential hazards? What are the potential benefits? And is my kid responsible enough to have something like that in their pocket?
So let's start out with the wargaming of the science. And you might have heard this before, the wargaming memo, or how industry is wargaming the science. That came out of a memo between Motorola and their public relations firm after a study by Dr. Henry Lai and scientist Dr. Singh showed DNA damage from radiofrequency radiation exposure. And I thought that it would be really important to present this first because wargaming, if you think about the video game where there is you're firing missiles at asteroids or things coming at you, and one by one, if you just keep exploding the different things coming at you in video games, that you can win the game, right? And that is how I think of what industry has really done well with the issue of cell phone and radiation, is you take a study, can be a very good study, and you just discredit it. And one by one, if you just attack every study, every scientist, and put forward information that seems to say the opposite of this credible science that is coming out, you can sway public opinion. So I thought I would start with Dr. Henry Lai actually saying in his words what happened with his study, which found cell phone radiation led to DNA damage in animals. And this is just excerpts from a online video. You can watch the whole video. It's over an hour long.
So what we did is that we had the rats that we exposed to a very low level of microwave. So it's not a heating effect. It's a very, very low level compared to what we use for cooking. And then we look at the DNA in the cells in the brain of this animal after exposure. And we found that the DNA, there's an increase in DNA breakage or DNA damage in these cells, these brain cells. So that's the, I guess it's very important finding. And at that time, we were very puzzled by this effect because the radiation is very, very low. And but well, we consistently observe DNA damage. At that time, we did not know what happened, and actually there was an internal memo that leaked out from the from Motorola, and the memo basically tried to find some way to discredit our results.
As well as other members of the industry, I understand that someone contacted both NIH and perhaps someone else contacted the University of Washington president at the time, trying to get you fired for that.
That's true. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I have to imagine that was that must have been somewhat surprising to you.
Yes, actually, that was actually very stressful too, and it was surprising because we're scientists and we're never involved in all this kind of like political and so it's kind of a very stressful time after we published the paper.
You said something interesting before we went on, that in fact, since the research has been cut off for this, since the funding for this research has been cut off for so long, that the scientists with expertise in this area have literally almost dried up in this country?
Yes. Well, these scientists either retire because there's no funding, or either move to another area that they can get funding. So they're basically out of the area. So it come up to the point is that if the U.S. government come up with some money to do this type of research, there's nobody to do it because people already left the field. So that is a big...
You can watch the full video of Dr. Lai explaining this on our webpage on industry influence to the research. And if you go online, we have links to everything I'm about to talk about, all the studies, all the resources, and also all the videos. So this is just a screen save of the Motorola memo, the wargaming memo that Microwave News released. And I'm going to quote a sentence from here. This is December 1994. Norman Sandler of Motorola's communications department send these memos to the public relations firm staff member. I'm off to Dallas, but obviously I'm reachable if necessary. I'm hoping we can get this document revision out of the way and return to more pressing matters. I think we have sufficiently wargamed the Lai-Sing issue. Assuming the SOG and CTIA, the SOG was a scientific advisory group, and the CTIA, the Telecom Industry Lobby Group, have done their homework. And there's another quote, I have these in boxes here, where they talk about their media strategy. And this is a media strategy alive and well today. That, keep Motorola not up on the front of the issue. We suggest that SOG, the Scientific Advisory Group, be the primary media contact, followed by the CTIA. It's critically important that third-party experts, including respected authorities with no specific background in RF, it is critically important that third-party experts be identified to speak on the following issues: the problem with the Lai-Sing and Sekar issues, and the health implications of DNA single-strand breaks. So they also say we need to limit our corporate visibility and defer complex scientific issues to credible, qualified scientific experts. That seems reasonable, right? Except that a lot of the scientific experts who are put forward, who have been for years, and who are put forward now are actually industry funded for a lot of the research that they do. And a lot of times we're not even privy to that information when we read it in print, or when we see the abstract online in PubMed. It doesn't say who funds the study. And sometimes there are university departments which are funded by industry, and then we don't have the connection. It's not clear as to who is funding this research. So we have this on our website too. This is the CTIA. It's it's a playbook of industry, and this is from the 1990s. And It's called the CTIA, Representing the Wireless Industry, and it is a procedures and resource manual for public health and safety issues. And it goes through with different questions that are asked, how to respond. So as an example, there are recommended responses to anticipated questions, and they all back the industry mantra of no effect, that there is no effect. I'll just read one quote on this page. The key to effective crisis management and media relations is to remain calm. Take time to determine the nature, scope, and intensity of the situation, however worrisome on the surface. And if the genesis of the crisis is a media inquiry or story, gather information on the reporter or news organization to establish motive, credibility, and/or likely impact. Knowing when and where a story in progress is to be printed or aired can be an important guide in formulating a response. And then here's an example of inside the manual where they have like anticipated questions and how to respond. How do you respond to talk of a possible link between cell phones and cancer? There is no research involving human beings or research animals that indicates cellular phone use is a cancer initiator or promoter. In fact, no research has shown that electromagnetic emissions characteristic of those of cellular telephones cause any adverse health effects. And really, this is still being stated by industry and industry consultants today. Of course, now sometimes they say that, and sometimes they say no established research. The word established sort of sneaks its way in. Or you hear, there is no research. And here's an example, and we have all of these on our website. They are the industry propaganda that is put forward. These are the covers. Glossy brochures that have the word safety plastered all over them, except they really don't show safety. They certainly don't show proof of safety, but they promote industry's message that there is no proof that this is not safe. One on Wi-Fi, Y-gig, small cells and health, all kinds of manuals that industry puts out. And industry puts it out by funding these nonprofit organizations, which then they're really communications and PR content that they put forward that shows no effect. Now, Dr. Henry Lai, and you can go to the Bioinitiative report and go under their news section and see how he has put together all kinds of documents looking at industry-funded versus non-industry funded studies. And here's just one example. And this is actually, at this point, several years old. He's done more updated analysis of the research. Non-industry funded studies more often show a harmful effect, whereas industry-funded studies more often show no effect. He's looked at research on DNA damage. You can see it not only on the Bioinitiative, but also on the Microwave News site, which is an excellent resource. If you're not familiar with Microwave News, please go to Microwave News and you can delve into industry funding going back decades and decades. Also, if you read Dr. Davis's book, The Secret History of the War on Cancer, as well as Disconnect, the Truth About Cell Phone Radiation. So in The Secret History of the War on Cancer, she deep dives into the chemical industry, scientists working on all kinds of toxic exposures related to cancer, and how it was known decades ago about not only what potential causes of cancer could be, but how to prevent cancer, and how that was put to the side because of industry influence. And there's a chapter in The Secret History of the War on Cancer about cell phone radiation. Then she published next an entire book. And she talks about Dr. Henry Lai, she talks about Dr. Adelkoffer, and all kinds of examples of the science and industry influence related to cell phone radiation. When you think about, well, how does industry influence studies? And the first thought for folks is often, well, they sort of get involved and the study comes out not showing an effect when it really does show an effect. But actually, there are many ways, other ways, that there can be an impact to the scientific literature. One is not allowing studies that show effects to actually be published, pulling out the money when researchers find effects, so you never make it to publication. Getting a study to publication is a lot of work. It takes time. And if you're not funded, then there's a lot of research that that's been done that never makes it into the published literature. So I wanted to share this video. This is Jerry Phillips, and this is from a really excellent documentary that, although it was released in 2000, I'm going to have to tell you that, man, it just has so many important aspects to it that are so relevant today. It's also a great way to wrap your mind around the history of this whole issue. I highly recommend it. It's called DNA, Democracy, and the Wireless Revolution. And here is Jerry Phillips talking about the research that he did and what happened when Motorola found out about his research.
I moved to California, Southern California. The 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers. I said, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swycord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude. That was it. I think one has to exercise caution at this point. And
So this is an interview, from almost 2 decades ago. And in some ways, we've come far in terms of research because, of course, the National Toxicology Program just published a study finding DNA damage in mice and rats exposed to cell phone radiation. But at the same time, I feel like we're we're back where we were because most people are not even aware that the study was just published by NIH or of this history of research showing DNA damage associated with radiofrequency radiation exposure. Because what we generally do when you hear about this issue is you go to the authorities that you trust. I know I did. And certainly, if it has the World Health Organization right up there, that's where I would be going to see what do they say. So you go to the World Health Organization website and you see, oh, there's a fact sheet on electromagnetic fields and public health. Great, what does it say? And it says, I mean, this is really where people zero in on is, are there any health effects, is the subtitle. And it says, a large number of studies have been performed over the last 2 decades to assess whether mobile phones pose a potential health risk. To date, no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use. There's a fact sheet on base station radiation, cell tower radiation, that also says, you know, there's no science supporting that there is a harmful effect. Actually, several fact sheets. So, well, the World Health Organization, that's really important. And in fact, elected officials and industry will be presenting this to residents in court cases as being proof that, see, the authorities we trust are saying that this is not not harmful or not proven to be harmful. So what people are often unaware of is that there is heavy influence into the World Health Organization's EMF project. There's actually 2 separate entities within the WHO, the World Health Organization. There is the EMF project, which has these fact sheets, and then there is also the International Agency for the Research on Cancer. And you've probably heard that the International Agency for the Research on Cancer classified radiofrequency as a class 2B possible carcinogen now almost a decade ago in 2011. But you might not be aware that there are these 2 entities. And so here we have this fact sheet by the EMF project, which is separate than the International Agency for the Research on Cancer. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because you might read this and say, wait, it says that no adverse health effects have been established. Well, there's some history to know, and that is that the EMF project was started with industry money, secret, we didn't know about it at the time, and the real question is, who wrote these fact sheets? Who wrote all the fact sheets on the World Health Organization website? And now I want to share with you, there is an excellent documentary called Microwaves, Science and Lies. And if you're interested in industry influence, this is a must watch. And in it, they have, and you can go online to watch this, and I'm clipping an excerpt from the movie, which was put online at a website called Sky Vision. But in it, there is a journalist who seeks to find out who wrote these fact sheets, which are being used worldwide to defend the rollout of base stations, cell phones, and of course now 5G.
In 2011, the Cancer Institute of World Health Organization, with the help of 31 experts from all around the world, classified radiofrequency radiation, including mobile phone radiation, as possibly carcinogenic. And 3 weeks later, it was very strange because the World Health Organization headquarters issued a fact sheet that dismissed the cancer risks and the cancer classification.
Whilst the IARC classification covers all radio frequencies, Fact Sheet 193 only refers to mobile phones. This creates the impression that the classification does not apply to other uses of radio frequencies, such as masts, Wi-Fi, DECT phones, radars, and industrial uses. But the sentence, "To date, no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use," fails to reflect the accumulating body of evidence. This WHO wording is strangely reminiscent of the discourse of the manufacturers who demand the highest level of scientific evidence.
And the very fact that you can interpret this sentence as contradictory
cette phrase comme contradictoire, ça veut dire que
that means that it's not very clear, it is even a bit misleading.
Un peu trompeur. Alors on a demandé.
So we asked the WHO in Geneva to correct that part of the fact sheet.
Cet élément soit corrigé dans leur fact sheet. Mais malheureusement.
But unfortunately, I've checked, the sentence is still there.
This key sentence has enabled manufacturers to deliver a message downplaying the IARC classification, which actually recognises some tentative evidence for the increase in cancers due to exposure to radio frequencies.
I wanted to know, I asked the responsible person at the World Health Organization, Emily van Deventer, who were the experts that wrote this fact sheet, this new information that was contradicting the Cancer Institute classification, and I had no answer.
Emily van Deventer is the current head of the EMF project within the World Health Organization. In June 2006, she replaced Michael Repaccioli, who she had assisted since the year 2000.
So when I met Emily van Deventer in Brussels 5 months later, I confronted her with my email, and I said I didn't never get any reply to my question, and I repeated my question. Who are the experts that you consulted and helped you write this fact sheet? And she still refused to answer to this very simple question. Who are the experts?
This one was just updated.
Yes, but who wrote it?
I am in charge of the fact sheet.
You wrote
and
it?
That the sentences that
They're updated
and then
with
it
the...
is a corporate fact sheet. It is not my fact sheet.
Yes, but who wrote it?
Who changed the sentence?
Yes, was it you or did you consult external
I changed
experts?
the sentence. I consulted with a number of experts.
Who were they?
And I
Yes.
had to ask my administration if that is an acceptable question.
Emily van Deventer has no specialist knowledge in the field of health. She is an electrical engineer with expertise in electromagnetic fields. She is a member of the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which originally set the international standards for public exposure to mobile phones. Emily van Deventer was a lecturer in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department of the University of Toronto in Canada. Here she carried out research financed by the telecommunications companies Bell Canada and Nortel before joining the WHO. During her public health role, Emily van Deventer remained in close contact with scientists who work for the industry. She co-wrote an article questioning the principle of precaution with some vocal defenders of the interests of electricity companies. In 2006, she joined Michael Repaccioli and Peter Valberg from the product defense consultancy Gradient in signing an article supporting the theory that electromagnetic waves pose no danger to the public. The issue of Emily van Deventer's relationship with industry is particularly thorny, as it was revealed in 2000 in the tobacco archives that the WHO had been infiltrated for over 10 years by unscrupulous scientists representing the industry. Since this painful episode, which shook the institution to its core, the WHO has appeared to take a stricter line, removing from its working groups all scientists with any links whatsoever to the tobacco industry. But this measure has not been extended to other industrial activities that could possibly influence the WHO's public health policies for their benefit.
That's why I'm here, because I worked for 12 years in WHO Because I worked for 12 years in WHO, getting these fact sheets as clear as we could make them and as accurate as we could make them from the science. And they've been accurate now for 10 years, those things. No research has indicated any effect below the level of the international standards. The international standards have remained the same for 15 years, which is really reassuring for people who are worried that these standards have stood the test of time and that research is not finding anything.
Dr. Leonard Hardell published an article in the International Journal of Oncology called World Health Organization, Radiofrequency, Radiation and Health, a Hard Nut to Crack. And he goes over the conflicts of interest and the relationships between the authorities that we trust to protect us. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, also known as ICNIRP. As he says, it is an industry-loyal NGO with a serious conflict of interest. Evidence has been published which indicates that members of ICNIRP have written scientifically incorrect and misleading information. He also talks about the WHO EMF project and the overlap between its members and ICNIRP. 5 of the 6 members of the core group in charge of the WHO EMF draft. This is a draft that was initiated several years ago, never actually came to fruition because of all the criticism in terms of the transparency issues with the WHO and how they are affiliated with ICNIRP. The non-thermal biological effects from radiofrequency radiation are dismissed as scientific evidence. This is an incredibly important paper. If you're wondering what is the situation with ICNIRP, I would start here, as well as going to Microwave News. And again, he talks about how the WHO IARC is not the same as the WHO EMF project. And also, of course, points out how the WHO EMF project was launched with financial support from the telecommunications industry. The GSM, the Mobile Manufacturers Forum, now called the Mobile and Wireless Manufacturers Forum. And I'm going to play you a quick clip which just came online. There was an international conference on radiofrequency radiation with several experts. And I found online a clip from that. I'm really looking forward to seeing all the videos online, but I haven't seen them yet. But I wanted to show you Dr. Hardell speaking about this issue.
RT is actually involved in this range of frequencies that has been classified as a possible human carcinogen. Interestingly, this has had no effect on legislation of exposure, reduction of exposure, and so on. So it seems that nobody is caring of this, at least of those who are setting the guidelines.
Now, let's take a look at the messaging that we hear from industry. And I'm going to share with you a video that has Repacholi speaking on a video created by the wireless industry. And of course, as I understand it, he is an industry consultant now. And he launched both ICNIRP as well as the EMF project of the World Health Organization.
Yet you get a smaller group of scientists saying that there's evidence emerging of possible risks in the future. What should people think about those differing views?
Well, there's a number of top scientific committees that are reviewing the literature all of the time. World Health Organization, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, as well as major committees for the European Commission and national committees. Are all reviewing the literature. And when I was at WHO, we had a monitoring process where we did reviews quite regularly and this is one of the best ways to monitor the literature, is do international reviews. There were many WHO reviews, and this would then result in scientific publications, reports of those meetings, and fact sheets that WHO produced to convey the information to the public, exactly what the status of the science was at any given time.
Here we have a screenshot from Microwave News of their most recent article on this, yet again talking about the connection between the World Health Organization and ICNIRP, and very specifically reiterating how Repacholi launched with industry money the EMF project in ICNIRP. And I'm just going to quote a few pieces from the Microwave News article. Repacholi revealed that half of the World Health Organization EMF project funding had come from industry. The cell phone industry admitted that it was making annual 6-figure contributions to the WHO EMF project, but Repacholi kept it all very hazy. That wasn't really clear at the time. And another quote, taking money from Motorola and industry trade associations, among others, violated WHO rules. But Repacholi found a workaround by laundering the money through Royal Adelaide Hospital in Australia, where he had been chief scientist from 1983 to 1991. So the money didn't go directly to him. It went to the hospital, which then in turn funded the project. So this is classic. It's happening in many other situations where we have universities publishing, doing research on radio frequency, and the funding is coming from industry. So, you follow the money, and then there it is. And here's another example of a commission that's often cited. Well, the International Committee on Electromagnetic Safety of the IEEE. Here's the meeting minutes, and you just look at where the meeting is, at Motorola. So I could share with you so many slides and talk for hours and hours just showing you example after example after example. And going back in time, this is not new. This is not new information. Go to Microwave News, their 2006 story. They have a couple where they talk about how Repacholi arranged for industry money to be sent to the Royal Adelaide Hospital in Australia, where he used to work. The funds were then transferred to the WHO. The article also quotes Norm Sandler, a Motorola spokesperson, saying, "This is the process for all the supporters of the WHO program. At the time, Motorola was sending Repacholi $50,000 each year. That money is now bundled with other industry contributions and sent to Australia by the Mobile Manufacturers Forum, which gives the project $150,000 a year." And as Repacholi says, and as scientists will tell you who are funded by industry, to say that I am or was ever influenced by industry in any way is completely ludicrous. So I'll leave that to you to be the judge of what you think about those words. And let's have another video of Repacholi talking about children.
We couldn't find anything that above the age of 2, the development process seemed to have concluded to the point that radio frequency fields wouldn't cause any adverse consequence after that age.
It sounds from the conclusions of that group like parents shouldn't be worried about allowing their children to use mobile phones.
Let's face it, mobile phones are here to stay. Children love mobile phones. It's one of their best means of communication. It's also a safety issue. Children should be encouraged to use technology. Otherwise, they'll be left while other children are using the technology, and the jobs are going to go to children who knew the technology very well at a young age. So certainly from the health viewpoint, there is no concern that we've seen this far to indicate that parents need to be worried about children's use of mobile phones.
So also this is documented in several investigations by journalists. Most recently by Investigate Europe, who they have, of course, a short 3-minute video, perhaps you've seen, Investigate Europe, 5G, the mass experiment, but also a whole section on how much is safe, and they talk about, they have this interactive graph where you can see that there really are just over a dozen scientists who either helped create or defend the EMF exposure guidelines disseminated by ICNIRP, and they're all a part of these international authorities across the world. And let me read a quote. ICNIRP self-selected members, because ICNIRP is an invite-only club. You can't just join ICNIRP to be involved in this very important issue of what are the allowable levels for radio frequency and why do we think it is so. Instead, you have to be invited in, by the way. So it is self-selected members. ICNIRP self-selected members argue that the thousands of peer-reviewed studies that have found harmful biologic or health effects from chronic exposure to non-thermal levels of EMF are insufficient to warrant stronger safety guidelines. And they argue that, for example, the National Toxicology Program, NIH study, that it does not impact the issue of whether there are health effects to humans enough that they need to change their recommendations for guidelines around exposure. And it goes on, but if you look at this graph, you see the different scientists, and the lines are just showing their connections to the different groups of WHO EMF, ICNIRP, as well as the UK Health Authority and others. And one question that I know I had was, wait a minute, aren't there hundreds of scientists who are issued this appeal in 2015?
Why is it so important that we win the 5G race?
They're saying that there's a problem and we should reduce exposure. Well, this seems important. So I actually am going to share with you a clip from a lecture or a panel presentation by the Swedish Radiation Safety Authority, another one of those international or national authorities that one would think we could trust to set guidelines that protect us. And they have Dr. Deventer presenting, and she is asked about why her guidelines, or the guidelines of ICNIRP and the World Health Organization EMF project opinion, are why are they being valued more than these scientists who are calling to reduce exposure?
Mona Nilsson, Swedish Radiation Protection Foundation. Last year, 220 scientists, there are now 220 scientists, signed an appeal that was sent to you and to the United Nations and its member nations, saying that the evidence is enough to take precautions and that the guidelines are far too high. They say we have evidence of DNA damage, oxidative stress, and neurological impact and damage, for instance, and reproductive problems. I also have a list here with over 500 studies that, if we have to trust the Swedish authority here and the World Health Organization, are all wrong. They show a consistent pattern that this radiation is harmful. What is your reply to those 220 scientists? And I also want another question. The second question is, why should the public in Sweden and the world trust you more than those 220 scientists?
Okay, thank you. Well, it's not a personal question. Of course, it's 220 versus, I don't know, what is your reference? But I have to say that your compilation of references is extremely useful. That over a year ago we drafted first draft of our monograph, which we put out for consultation for 4 months on our website. We got 700 comments. And that was extremely helpful because it provided us with at least 300 papers that we had missed. So if you can provide such a list, this is extremely positive for us to make sure that our database is complete. As I mentioned, we try to be as systematic as possible, but we can always miss things. So this is one point. The other point is the fact that, as I mentioned, we have pre-selected quality criteria, and in the document we will include all the papers reviewed, and if they have not been taken into account in the balance of evidence, we will explain on what grounds they were not included. This is part of the transparency process that I mentioned. Thank you.
A Harvard reporter, Norm Alster, did an investigation on the money and industry money in the United States and how it's influenced science and policy. The name of the paper is Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industry It Presumably Regulates. And in it, you can really, it's eye-opening because he documents the money to various members of Congress, as well as the money into science and stories about science. And I'll just do a quote. Consumer safety, health, and privacy, along with consumer wallets, have all been overlooked, sacrificed, or rated due to unchecked industry influence. It is these hardball tactics that recall 20th century big tobacco tactics. And, you know, when I first heard about the word captured agency, I didn't really know what that meant. I was told, well, it's regulatory capture. And I was like, what is that? What is regulatory capture? This was way back when I first started learning about this issue and really trying to understand it. Regulatory capture is when the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be keeping industries in check are actually unduly influenced by these various agencies they're supposed to be in charge of. When the wolf is watching the hen house. And that is what this excellent investigation details. And you can see there's a picture of a revolving door. And what that's about is the revolving door between industry and government. Because we often think, well, our government would protect us. Our government would have limits that protect us. But actually, industry is in the government, and then the government, when people retire from government, they often go to industry. So let me give you some examples of that. And we created this graphic based on information from the Harvard report, as well as some new information. So at the time the report was issued, Tom Wheeler was the FCC chair. And Tom Wheeler is the former head of the CTIA, the Wireless Association Lobby Group, the former head of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. Now we have Ajit Pai as FCC chair, former counsel for Verizon. There's also Brendan Carr, FCC commissioner, who is the former lawyer for Wiley Rhine Law Group, which represented the CTIA, the wireless industry, when the wireless industry sued San Francisco for their cell phone ordinance, which informed people that phones emitted radiation and here's how you can reduce exposure. And Brendan Carr was one of the lead lawyers working on that lawsuit, alleging that it violated the free speech rights of companies. Then, and his wife is the oversight staff director of the Committee on Ways and Means of the U.S. House of Representatives. Here are some video clips of FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr and FCC Chair Ajit Pai ensuring us that safety is paramount to the FCC and that this network is safe.
The FCC, as well as other agencies that are experts in health and safety issues, are always looking very closely at these issues, staying up to date on the latest science. They've looked at all of the studies and all the information, and they've reached the determination that these are safe. And that's a determination that is constantly undergoing review, and any new information that comes up is taken into account. And in fact, given the position of the federal agencies on this, federal law actually says that state and local governments can't take RF concerns into account, given how much work has already gone into this issue at the federal level. And that's not to say that you don't hear about these concerns, and we have community meetings that people raise the concerns. But what I can say is that at the FCC and other expert health agencies in Washington, they stay very much up to speed on these issues and have reached the determination that these are safe.
And as another example, we have FCC head Ajit Pai, former Verizon lawyer, assuring safety as well.
We are not the health experts when it comes to these issues. We've consulted, of course, with the Federal Food and Drug Administration and with others who are responsible for determining what those standards should be. And we are confident that our standards are ones that are healthy for consumers.
However, the FDA has not done a systematic review of the science, and they issued a statement. Jeffrey Shuren, the director of the FDA's Center for Radiological Health, stating that the NTP program's report on radio frequency radiation, that it doesn't apply to humans, even though it found clear evidence of cancer in animals. Jonathan Adelstein is president of the PCIA Wireless Infrastructure Association and former FCC commissioner. Meredith Atwell-Baker is a former FCC commissioner and now head of the CTIA. CTIA is the Telecom lobby group, and here she is having a chat with Ajit Pai, he as FCC chair, and she as the head of the telecommunications industry.
That we knew about the White House's commitment to the United States leading the 5G race. You are working very closely with him, which is tremendous for all of us. But the same question to you, why is it so important that we win the 5G race?
Well, first off, Meredith, thank you. Thanks to CTIA for inviting me here. Thanks for all of you taking an interest in this important conversation.
And it goes on and on and on. And as an example, Bruce Romano, this is just a snippet from a news article. He used to be the associate legal chief at the FCC. Now he's gone to the law firm of Wiley Ryan, which represents the CTIA. So of course, he worked at the FCC. He knows all the inside information, and here he is now representing the telecommunications industry.
In conclusion, sorry, Freudian slip, my bad. Many people are still shell-shocked that I'm up here tonight. They ask themselves, how on earth did this happen? Well, moments before tonight's dinner, somebody leaked a 14-year-old video. Okay.
As you know, the FCC is captured by industry, but we think it's not captured enough. So we will
One plan, so what do you have in mind?
We want to brainwash and groom a Verizon puppet to install a
That sounds awesome.
I know, right? There's only two problems. First, this is going to take 14 years to implement. So we need to find someone smart, young, ambitious, but dorky enough to throw the scent on.
Whoa! But there's another issue.
We need to find a Republican who will be able to win the presidency in 2016 and appoint you to FCC chairman. I think our best bet is an outsider, but I have no idea who that could be. If only somebody could give us a sign.
And that's...
The CDC has information which is minimal, it's outdated. There's been no scientific review that we know about that is the basis for their statements. The FCC does not have health experts, and they say, hey, we're not a health and safety agency. But yet, if you actually go to the EPA, I know I'm sort of going around in circles, But the EPA says we'll go to the FCC for information. The National Cancer Institute has a long, many discussions on this and that and different research studies, and everyone who I know who has gone to that site, who's new to the issue, says, oh, this says there's no problem. Well, first of all, that's not what it says, but I can understand how you might be confused. And I challenge you to just go on to the National Cancer Institute site, and I challenge you to find the information on the NIH National Toxicology Program study findings. Just check it out, see what you find. And you'll see that it's very different from the information that the National Toxicology Program puts out on their webpage. Two agencies, two different sets of information. It's quite shocking, actually. So, you know, we're sort of in this funny position where there are no internationally recognized authorities on electromagnetic fields that are not industry connected or who don't have conflicts of interest. There is research. We have all of this on our website that shows industry money affects the quality of results. This is a study. Mobile phone use and the risk of brain tumors, a systematic review of the association between the study quality, source of funding, and research outcomes. And this found that the funding affected the results. And it says, we found evidence linking mobile phone use and risk of brain tumors, especially in long-term users. Studies with higher quality showed a trend towards higher risk of brain tumors, while lower quality showed a trend towards lower risk protection. This is a paper which found evidence of sponsorship and publication bias. It says that the existence of sponsorship and publication biases should encourage WHO intervention to develop official research standards and guidelines. In addition, future research should address critical and neglected issues such as investigation of repeated, intensive, and chronic exposures, especially in the highly sensitive population, such as children. This is a study by Dr. Carpenter of the University of New York at Albany. It was looking at power line electromagnetic fields and found that the source of funding affects the results. It's clear that almost all government, I'm quoting, or independent studies find either a statistically significant association between magnetic field exposure and childhood leukemia or an elevated risk, whereas almost all industry-supported studies fail to find any significant or even suggestive association. And if you go to the Environmental Health Trust website, we have a web page on industry's influence into the science, where we list the published research studies and the analysis of the science and research showing how industry money influences the science. So another way that industry has been successful in keeping the wool over the public's eyes is by funding, with their millions of dollars, public relations campaigns and communications campaigns, such as the one I'm about to talk about now. I actually found this online. This is a PowerPoint by the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is funded by several telecom companies that have Wi-Fi technology in their electronics. And they have a two-pronged approach to radio frequency safety. One is the commitment, and two is the outreach and education to members in the public. Now, when they say commitment, what they're talking about is ensuring that their products meet the radio frequency safety requirements. Those requirements are FCC limits, which were, of course, set over 20 years ago and based on false assumptions of safety in terms of that the only effect that could harm us would be heating, and it does not address any of the biological effects. But that said, they're ensuring that all of their members will have a statement in the manual that they do conform to the current limits. And then, very interestingly, they have an outreach and education section, which I'm going to talk about, formed more than a year ago, over 50 members. And remember, each member is a company like Verizon or Sprint or all of these companies which have wireless products. So their public awareness efforts includes creating a brochure on Wi-Fi and health, developed with MMF, that's the Mobile Manufacturers Forum, which is another one of those large industry-funded organizations that support these companies. They supported an independent exposure assessment on Wi-Fi. That means that they paid a researcher to look at the radiation levels from Wi-Fi and publish a study on it, and participate in radio frequency safety forums and conferences and interact with other organizations. For example, the MMF, that's the Mobile Manufacturers Forum, an industry group, the WiMAX Forum, another industry group, and the GSM Association, another industry group. And here we have one of the brochures that they developed, which we have online on our website, WLAN and Health, about Wi-Fi and health. And here you can see someone with a phone to their head and using a laptop in the beautiful outdoor space, and a mother looking at her baby. And there we have someone typing on a laptop. Now, what's really interesting is that under the statement about health, they talk about a study, the one that they funded, and that study, by the way, didn't even look at the user's exposure from a wireless laptop, say on the lap or even on a table. They just looked at if there were a wireless access point in the room, what would the levels be? And of course they met FCC limits and regulatory limits because those are so sky high it would be very hard to breach them, actually. And what we know, of course, is that those limits are non-protective of our health. Nonetheless, they commissioned this study by Kenneth Foster, and it found that all of the levels that were measured were within regulatory limits. And as it says, acknowledgement, this work was supported by the Wi-Fi Alliance. And actually, Kenneth Foster has published multiple studies funded by industry groups such as the Wi-Fi. And of course, industry hires scientists to come and present and give official testimony stating their opinion that there is no harmful effects from radio frequency.
And I assure you that everything I know about 5G installations is that they will be completely safe, that the powers that they emit are tiny compared to the FCC standards. And my judgment is that
since 2000, what have you heard about electromagnetic radiation? Fortunately, we have skin in between and we have our skull. I'll say fortunate. Why? Because I'm going to do a Mythbusters today, right? So, number one. Up here, you're absolutely right. It fries more than your brain, right? I think we're all familiar with this here, Chernobyl and everywhere else, yes? And X-rays, I think you understand more or less how they work. We're right down here. Yep, just to put it in perspective. That's a couple of orders of magnitude below. So here's the myth. The myth is that in 2000 a gentleman did a study that the human brain would absorb radio waves, and certainly it does. Certainly, well, the tests he did were on rats and mice. But it was done on cells in a lab, not real. That's been the industry benchmark for almost 20 years. So how do we bust a myth? By telling the truth. And the truth seems to come from the World Health Organization. So this is their opinion. I don't have the date and I haven't got the report myself right now. But I encourage you to get a copy of it, and I think this is probably the first reason why you should feel good about 5G. So 2 key components are that your FM radio and TV actually emit more. Yeah, they emit more radiation. Yeah. And the second one is, for all of you who've been holding a cell phone to your ear for the last 20 or 30 years, I think you're probably still normal, right?
When the fact is that the basis for many conclusions by activists have been rebuked by leading global health organizations and a district judge, it tells you that we're not making this up. And I want to be very clear. Industry has not said once that cell phones are safe. The federal government, the various interagency working groups have all said it's safe.
And because of the lack of accountability at every level of government when it comes to wireless radiation, the lack of any systematic review, and yet when you go to our government agencies' websites, it seems like everything is fine. We are in a situation where we are being sold devices to children, to and for animals, pregnant women, to people at every age, as if this technology is safe, when it was never, ever pre-market safety tested for long-term safety. And of course, there was evidence of harm and of effects at very, very low levels, even when the United States adopted the radiation limits that we did. However, that was dismissed because the EPA was defunded. So here are some examples of commercials and videos and the way industry is marketing to us. And I ask that everyone who watched this video until this point to please spread the word on this. Get informed. Speak to your neighbors, speak to your friends and families, and then contact your elected officials, because I fully believe we can fix this.
My story is that I was diagnosed with a stage 3 tumor in my left leg. After much research, I learned that it very likely was caused by my laptop, which I kept on my left leg for hours upon hours at a time. It affected me in many ways as a runner. And then as a result of the information that I found, I learned that it is not only the laptops, it is the mobile devices. And my mission is to create awareness so that this doesn't happen to anyone ever again. But it's simple. It's just about being smart. It's just about being smart. Don't put your phone in your bra. I put it on, if I'm going to use my cell phone, I put it on speakerphone. Are there times where you can't hear it? Yeah, of course. And of course, there are times, of course, I use it the way you're not supposed to, up against your head. But it's not that hard. If I know that, as I said, if I'm going to wear it in my armband, you know, if I'm at the gym, I put it in airplane mode. It's simple. Airplane mode. It's that easy. Or turn it off. So it's really not that hard. It's just a slide of the device. And if people don't believe me, all they have to do is they can look at the legal disclaimer, which is online for their cell phone. It's fairly easy to find this information. Well, no, I'm sorry. It's not that easy. It's pretty elusive, actually. I apologize. I take that back. It's not easy to find this information. I had to dig deep. I had to dig really deep and really scroll through all of the information in the owner's manual for my laptop, where I found on page 11, keep this 8 inches away from your body. So if absolutely nothing else, that parents will protect their children. That is my goal. I do not want children to be exposed to this. They trust us. They rely on us. So my goal is that whether it's in life or death, that my story will inspire others to spread the word and not be afraid that people are going to think they're crazy. My goal is that even after I'm gone, I want people to know my story. I want people to know Susie's story too, because I promised her I'd keep it going. Never give up, never ever give up, never back down. And, you know, as I said early on, my motto is I won't back down, and that applies in many ways. I'm not backing down to this cancer. I'm not giving up yet, but it's also I will not back down in regard to spreading this word.